Hey everyone, if you don't know who I am, my name is Samuel Laws, and along with my dad, I co-lead pastor Brave Church in the East Bay of San Francisco. And a few months back, we started a podcast called the Becoming Brave Podcast. If you've been following along and joining us on this adventure, thank you so much. We've never done this before. We appreciate all the feedback we've been getting. But since then, we've realized our vision is very clear. We want to help people go further as they follow Jesus through this podcast in a conversational format. And so we're changing the name to the Follow Podcast. This is our first episode. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Follow Podcast, where we're passionate about helping people go further as they follow Jesus. We believe spiritual growth is an adventure that never ends. So whether you're exploring faith or already a follower, we're so glad you're joining us on this journey. Okay, hey, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Samuel Laws, and we have a guest with us today. This is Dominic Done.
Hey.
And so as you'll notice, he is not my father. Dad is actually with my mom doing some special treatment in Reno for her multiple sclerosis. And so that's been a journey for her. And we really appreciate in our community everyone who's been praying for her. And if you're following along with us, man, we really appreciate your prayers during this time. But we wanted to keep engaging and growing together. Mm-hmm. And so Dominic was here speaking at Brave Church, the church that I pastor with my dad in San Ramon, California, in the Bay Area. And so I asked him if he'd come on our podcast.
It's so good to be here, man.
Man, great to have you.
Thank you.
So Dominic and I, man, we had a blast yesterday.
Yes.
Just exploring
all you're showing me all the spots, man.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Had
some good eats too.
Some close calls, climbing some cliffs.
That's right.
But we're here.
Yeah.
And so he just wrote a book called When Faith Fails. And how long has it been out now?
It came out February 19th.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what's that, like 5 months or something?
Wow. And the response has just been really cool. So this book is called When Faith Fails. Finding God in the Shadow of Doubt. And one of the things that really fascinated me about just hearing about this book and when you were telling me you were writing it is you've had personal experiences, obviously, with the topic, and I want to hear about that. But a lot of people write books on their personal experiences or something they're really passionate about. But I really feel like this book was also just a prophetic message to people who are going through this, and really a growing group of people that are wrestling with their doubts and not sure how. So tell us a little bit about some of your research and thinking about that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting just to see how doubt's on the rise. 2/3 of Americans who identify as Christian, according to a recent Pew survey, say they struggle with doubt on a regular basis. Doubt as a whole is growing 15% in the last 10 years.
Wow. And
there's something happening in our nation as we become increasingly secular, post-Christian, post-truth. That also goes hand in hand with a relinquishing of Christian values and theology and understanding of who God is. Charles Taylor, he's a sociologist, wrote a brilliant book called A Secular Age, and he talks about this. He uses the word disenchantment and how as a culture we become increasingly disenchanted with the idea of God and pushing God to the margins of culture and society, and what that's done is created a vacuum that I think in time, people will realize, culture will realize just the ache and longing that's there. And to a certain degree, we do. But materialism, consumerism, self-worship can only take you so far. Yeah. So we are in a moment now. Many people are struggling with their faith, but I also have great hope too.
You mentioned a term this morning in your message about people that are deconstructing their faith, deconstruction. Yeah. What is deconstructionism? And what does it mean for someone to be going down that path? I'm wondering if there's people that obviously are intentionally deconstructing their faith, and then maybe others aren't even aware that that's what their journey is.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up. So one of the unhealthy responses to doubt is we see it played out in a city like Portland, same with the Bay Area, and I think across the nation, is putting more trust in our doubts than in the thing that we're doubting. And so this term deconstruction is probably a good way of putting it, where a Christian will go down a path of just tearing apart, dismantling, if you would, different aspects of their faith. And I think deconstruction, I want to be careful how we use that word, because it can be used in a negative way, deconstruction just for the sake of deconstruction, or deconstruction without replacement of something that's life-giving. Can be very, very dangerous, but also deconstruction can be a healthy thing if it's done as part of the process of becoming a mature follower of Jesus. So say, for example, you have doubts and questions about a certain eschatological perspective or the creation of the world. That can be a healthy deconstruction if it's being replaced with, this is sounder theology.
Right.
This is a better perspective to have. So if deconstruction is a remodel, and what you get at the other end is something beautiful, Faith 2.0, then awesome. If it's just deconstruction where it's an angsty, kind of rebellious, I don't like my faith because my parents gave it to me or church hurt me or whatever, and I'm just throwing it all out, I think that can be kind of inward and narcissistic and lead you to a place where there's not a whole lot left. And everyone needs a foundation to stand on.
That's really interesting because, there's a lot of us probably as who are followers of Jesus, and you might be listening or watching and you're not a follower of Jesus, but there's this like term I've been hearing more and more, de-churched, and it's people that have walked away from their faith, or at least walked away from it as they knew it. Yeah. And maybe not even connecting or gathering with a traditional church experience. And I'm just wondering, is that like, what advice would you give someone who is deconstructing their faith to not kind of go off the edge?
Right. Yeah, I think it depends on how you define edge, but I think the worst thing you can do if you're in a season of deconstruction is to isolate yourself. And that is the temptation. Is, okay, let's say I'm struggling with believing parts of Scripture, or I'm struggling with a theological perspective, or struggling with what my parents taught me, whatever. What you need in that time, when it feels like your faith is failing, when you're experiencing doubt, more than ever, is you need healthy community.
Right.
And when you isolate yourself, well, doubt's greatest strength is secrecy. And so we need others. We need others to be with us on the journey. Anne Lamott, she talks about this in one of her books. She's a brilliant writer, thinker. But in one of her books, she talks about how the ancient Chinese, they would have these beautiful vases. And if one of them got cracked or broken, rather than just throwing the vase away, they would take a very thin gold leaf and they would cover the crack with the gold leaf and set it back on the shelf. And it was their way of saying, rather than hiding the crack, pretending it doesn't exist, throwing it away because it's broken, we want to draw attention to its imperfection. We want to put it on display. And I think what the church needs are more broken vessels who have gone through seasons of doubt and deconstruction even, and reconstruction, but haven't isolated themselves, but are willing to say, here's part of my journey, here's what I've learned. Yeah. And sadly, in many church contexts, we haven't given a space for the broken people. Yeah. There's no gold leaf, right? Yeah. Instead, we just emphasize having the picture-perfect faith that often sounds like Christianese.
Yeah, well, you mentioned those two extremes, right? Demonizing, which leads to suppression. Right. And idolizing, which is kind of worshiping our doubt. Yeah. I have never met someone that said they were worshiping their doubt. Yeah. Or that they were idolizing it, especially not while in that experience. They might look back, but I haven't heard that very often. What does it look like to idolize your faith?
Yeah, so when you're in the midst of it, you're not going to say, oh yeah, I'm idolizing it. But essentially that's what it is. It's when you're putting more confidence and trust in this specific objection to faith, rather than taking time to examine it carefully. In other words, it's a whole lot easier to pick the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story and seen this play out where, say, a college student goes off to school and they take half a biology class, or they read half of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And then it's kind of an act of their own becoming, their own journey, maybe rebellion too. And they announce on Snapchat, "I'm an atheist, everyone." Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You used to volunteer with our youth group. What are you talking about? I have seen that so many times. And what is that? It's idolizing the doubt. It's putting doubt in a place where it ought not to be in your life, and assuming that it's speaking truth when it may not be.
Yeah.
What it's done is it's awakened in you some kind of concern for your faith, or a longing to go deeper in your faith. And that's actually the pivotal moment. That's the key time, rather than abandoning faith, to lean deeper into it, to say, okay, take a deep breath. Yeah, I'm struggling right now, but I'm not going to let go of community.
Yeah.
And maybe I need to just get some good books, get some close friends, find a mentor. I need to pray, go on long walks with the Lord, right? And this will be a season in my life where I'm going to allow my doubts and struggles to drive me closer to God rather than away from God.
Yeah. I love how even just in talking about doubt, you've uncovered something that is just rarely talked about, but so something that everyone experiences for the most part. I mean, you mentioned in your talk today that there's people that just have like this gift that they just can never relate almost. And maybe that's true, maybe not, because you just never know. But so what are some of the doubts that just in your journey have really led you to go deeper in your faith?
Man, in the book, in the heart of the book, because I didn't want to just talk about doubt from a theological perspective or even just a personal perspective, although I do share my story in there. I also want to get specific and talk about some things that fuel our doubts.
Yeah.
And I think some of the biggest are, and you could write volumes just on this, but if you were to consolidate it down to a handful, it has to include doubts about the Bible.
Yeah.
Can I trust the Bible? What about the weird parts of the Bible? How do I interpret the Bible? Doubts about science. So many people, I think especially in the emerging generation, who love the sciences, and they see what seems to them at first glance a superficial conflict between faith and religion. And part of that's fueled really on both sides by uber conservative Christians that imply that science is the enemy of faith, or even like radical atheism, like a Richard Dawkins, who will say that science and faith are at odds. So it's interesting, you have both sides saying the same message. And what that has done is it's created within the hearts of so many this fear and this feeling of, I have to choose between, am I going to believe in science or God? I mean, Nacho Libre, right?
Yeah.
Right? Do you believe in God? No, I believe in science.
Yeah.
People think there's this clash and this tension, and there isn't. So I talk about that. I do talk about suffering. I think that's one philosopher said that suffering really is what underpins all philosophy, the question of suffering. And I think to a certain degree they're right. What is philosophy but the soul's ache for an answer to that question of pain? And so much of theology even circles back to that suffering. There are no simple answers to that. I wish there were. But in that chapter, we kind of talk through some possible solutions and eventually land at Jesus and the cross, because he shows what suffering looks like.
Yeah.
But then there's hope. And then the last one is on the silence of God. And that's another huge one.
Yeah.
So many people are like, look, I want to believe. I haven't heard from God for 5 years. I read the Bible and it just seems like empty to me. I pray and may as well be talking to a wall. And where is God? Why is he so silent? Why doesn't he show up?
Wow.
And so in that chapter, I unpack that. So for me personally, that's a long roundabout way of saying those are and were things that I've wrestled through, continue to wrestle through. And I think that they really construct what is for many people the source of their doubt.
Wow. Okay, so I don't know what category to put this in, but I'm just thinking about there's one thing in particular that has caused me to feel doubt. And it's a thought that pops into my head at different times. And, I guess for me, it's interesting because suffering is not something I've really wrestled with too much, because I think I've just grown up around so much direct physical suffering.
Yeah.
My brother was born with cerebral palsy. My grandfather had rheumatoid arthritis when he was 25. So my whole life he's been severely disabled. And then my mom has multiple sclerosis. So I've just seen so much faith and such a deeply personal relationship with God in the midst of all that suffering. So that's the only thing I can think of that has like really just kind of fortified my faith when it comes to suffering.
Yeah.
But every now and then I just get overwhelmed by how many people are on this planet that don't know Jesus.
Yeah.
And I just think, man, this is undeniably real. My relationship with God, the experiences I've had, and then even just intellectually and everything that I've studied. So I haven't gotten to the point where I was like doubting God's existence, but I've just wondered, why aren't we having a bigger impact? Like, what if like a nuclear bomb went off? Yeah. Where does everybody go? What happens? Just reconciling that.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. It's fascinating you set up the question that way by talking about suffering, because at its core, what you're asking is about hell. Yeah. Right? And what is hell but suffering? Right? So I think what's fueling your question is very, very related. Like, why is there suffering at a macro level? You've dealt with it personally and in your family, and you've seen hope and redemption. But now you're asking the question, where's the hope and redemption for humanity as a whole? And that's a very good question. So I like to think of it this way, and I don't know the answer. It's a short answer, but here's what's helped me a bit. I believe Jesus is the way. I believe the way is narrow, like Jesus said. He said that. I don't fully understand what that means, like how that will play out. No one comes to the Father but through him. So we have that, but then and we often quote those verses when it comes to the big picture of who's going to heaven, who's going to hell.
Right.
But there's another side too, which God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And I just believe in the character of God, the heart of God, that each person in some way will have opportunity to respond. I don't know what that will look like. Yeah. I'm certainly not universalist, which is, this belief that everyone's going to get saved. Well, to me, that seems like a violation of free will. Yeah. Everyone has to be able to choose for themselves. But I just think God is at work. He's called us to be a part of the Great Commission and spreading the gospel. And I think how the gospel gets out is so beautiful and creative. I read this fascinating book, which you might be interested in, called Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson. And he talks about going to unreached people groups and unreached tribes. Wow. And there were some that he went to only to discover that God had essentially paved the way for him by giving them dreams and visions, like very, very similar. One example would be someone had a vision that there's going to be a guy that would come with a book that would give them truth and things like that. So he shows up, and they have all these myths and parts of their story and parts of their culture that was all about redemption. And he's like, hey, his name is Jesus. And they're like, awesome, right? And the tribe becomes a Christian. So I share that to say, God's at work in the world. Yeah. God is good, and he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. I don't know how that's all going to play out. I really don't, but I know God's merciful. I know he's good. I know he's holy, and I know that he loves people. Yeah. And he proved that by sending his son. Yeah. So for me, I would answer that question by saying, I don't know, but I do know that God is a good God, and I'm going to trust that. Yeah. And be a part of getting the good news out as much as I can.
That's awesome. So let's end with this. Yeah. What are some practical things that you would say to someone who's wrestling with doubt? I mean, you mentioned the importance of healthy community. Yep. I love that. Are there a few more things that you'd point us to besides reading the book, right? Get the book. That'll help.
Burn it.
But let's end with some next steps for someone who's really in that place right now.
Absolutely. So the last part of the book is practical.
Okay.
It's the last third. And it's dedicated to, here are some practical next steps. Here's some tools on how you can work through seasons of doubt.
Okay.
So one example would be community. I have a whole piece on just the importance of community, how others can help carry that load for you. And you just need people in your life that you can say, help, I'm struggling, and pray for me, or what do you think about this? And having a mentor, having someone who's further along in the journey who can give us some input and insight. So that's huge. Prayer is another big one. And not superficial prayer, but like prayer that comes from the heart and pouring your heart out to him. I love this story, and I kind of use it to kick off that practical section of Jacob wrestling with God all night. And wrestling is hard, and it's sweaty and awkward and involves armpits. And right? Yeah. It's not always fun. But he wrestled with God all night, and God met him, and then God changed his name. And he went from Jacob to Israel, he who wrestles with God. That's what Israel means. He walked away with a limp. He was changed. His character was changed. As you know, names in the Bible, they speak of character. And I think something happens when we wrestle with God, when we are real with God and raw and honest with God, like the book of Psalms, and we take a season of our life and just say, I'm going to be more honest with God than I ever have before. Wow. You wrestle with him, and you may not come away with all the answers. Chances are you'll walk with a limp, but your name will be changed. You will have been changed in the process. So that's another really important piece. I talk about the importance of learning and just digging into good books and podcasts like yours, and just allowing our soul to be nourished with truth. That is huge. For me, that was a big part of my healing process. So those are just a few things. I share some others too in the end.
I love, you said one of the worst things is isolation.
Yes.
And I love it because if you think about it, the moment you start voicing your doubts in a healthy community, there's going to be people that go, yeah, I wrestled with that one too, and here's what I learned. And it just unlocks the ability to really grow together. And so you never know, like even when you're opening up, there could be 2 or 3 others that are at that same place. Right. And all of a sudden they feel the freedom to explore that together. You shared a quote that I loved. And I don't know if this is your quote or what, but you said something I wrote down. It was awesome. You said, true love is the pursuit of love.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then you said mystery is the lifeblood of intimacy.
Yeah. I did say that actually in chapter 1. So what I meant by that is I think God allows ambiguity and uncertainty. And unpack that in chapter 1 about Genesis. God allows a world in which doubt exists in order to drive us into greater intimacy. So I think if our starting point with doubt is Genesis 3, that I think we're on the wrong foot. For a lot of Christians, that's where they start with a theology of doubt. They say the first time we see doubt in the Bible is Satan with Eve, and he deceived her. He used doubt. He put doubt in their mind. Therefore, doubt is always evil. Yeah. True, doubt can be used in an evil way. Doubt can create uncertainty within us that drives us from God. Absolutely. But I don't think you should start in Genesis 3 for a theology of doubt. Start at the beginning. Start in Genesis 1. And what do you see in Genesis 1? You have a limitless, infinite, omniscient, omnipresent God who creates something. When God creates something, he's creating something that by definition, he's not duplicating himself. He's not making another God. Yeah. So he's making something other than himself. If it's not another God, well, it's going to be slightly less than his perfection, right? Thus, you see in Genesis, it says the world was good, but it doesn't say it was perfect. And obviously there's something wrong because there's a talking snake in there. Yeah. That's a whole other conversation. So God creates something, a world where boundaries existed, boundaries of time and space and matter. The Garden of Eden was a garden in a world, but the garden had limits. He creates Adam and Eve. They had limits. They didn't know everything, obviously, right? They hadn't eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the world from its inception had limits built into the system. And so what I argue in chapter 1 is, what if God creates it that way, while at the same time making us curious?
Yeah.
Because Adam and Eve were deeply, deeply curious. So he allows curiosity, creates a world of limitations in order to get us to explore.
Yeah.
I mean, God says, this world's yours. Go, enjoy it, have fun, be fruitful, multiply, go see stuff. There's an incredible world to explore. So I think God did that intentionally in order to get us out of our comfort zone into a place of pursuit. It's a quest.
Yeah.
God's designed us to be wrestlers. Deep in our DNA is a longing to explore. And so God allows the mystery to drive us to intimacy, right?
Yeah.
True love is the pursuit of love, like any relationship.
Yeah.
With my wife, I know a lot about her. I don't know her 100%. I don't know what she's thinking right now. I don't know exactly where she is right now, other than home probably, but I don't know what room she's in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's still ambiguity, but that's a good thing, right? It's the ambiguity that will cause me, when we're done, to call her up and say, hey, what are you up to? And tell me about your last hour, because I don't know what she's done this last hour. And what if God made the world the same way, to keep us coming back to him? He creates a world where questions exist so that we can ask those questions and find him. Like C.S. Lewis said, you yourself are the answer.
The last thing that you talked about this morning, and it left me at such an inspired place to want to lean into doubts, to want to even just to ask you that question, right? Because you really do have a more like genuine, authentic relationship with God when you go through those things.
Totally. Yeah, and just you asking that's so healthy. That's so good. Because we have a choice. We can either suppress those questions, right? Or we can just assume the question is telling us something that it isn't. Or we can say, I'm going to get this out there. And it's in that act of just verbalizing and wrestling and pursuing answers that there can be healing and opportunity.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes these seeds of doubt can be an element of spiritual warfare. And we've been in a season, an incredible season as a church, of seeing so many people decide to follow Jesus. And so I just thought it was interesting that was starting to pop into my head.
You
know, because it's like here I'm surrounded by all of this beautiful godly impact.
Right.
And then going, but what about all these other people?
Totally.
You know, and that's like where my mind went.
And we should wrestle with that. Isidore Isaac Rabi, he was a Nobel laureate in the 40s and a scientist, brilliant guy. And someone once asked him the secret to his success. And he said, the key to my success is when I was a kid, I came home from school every day, and most parents would ask their kids, did you learn anything today? He said, my mom would ask me every day, did you ask any good questions today?
Wow.
And he said, that's what made the difference. And I think that's God's heart for us. In fact, Deuteronomy, God says to the parents, when your children ask you, this is what you're to tell them. God's assuming and encouraging kids, you're going to ask questions. There's going to be story time, and there's going to be theology time, right? Jesus, the way he led his disciples was asking questions. Do you believe this? Who do you say that I am? Over 300 times, question after question after question. Questions force us to open up within our own assumptions. Questions, if we deal with it in a healthy way, can lead us deeper and deeper into truth.
Wow. Well, we're going to have to do this again sometime.
I would love
because every time you ask me a question, I just want to ask it back. But I really appreciate you taking the time to do this after speaking 3 times today. So you've used a lot of words. You can be alone now. You've earned some alone time. But no, I really appreciate it, Dominic.
Thank you.
You're one of the smartest people I know.
Oh man!
And I always know I can bring a good question to you if I'm stuck.
Oh man, thank you. It's an honor to hang out with you, man.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, make sure if you haven't, you subscribe, because we're going to have more podcasts coming your way, more opportunities to grow. This is a place for us to grow together, ask questions. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us on the Follow Podcast. Wherever you may be on your faith journey, remember that following Jesus was never meant to be done alone.